Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the Oklahoman's video studios, and we are just a few days away from the big runoff elections across the state of Oklahoma. We've got the race for the GOP nominee for governor. We've got a series of legislative races, big questions on whether or not some incumbents are going to lose their seats. And we'll have all that coverage for you leading up to the election on Tuesday and on election night. But let's talk about what to expect, and let's talk a little bit about the big ticket race on the ballot, and that is the GOP race for governor. Joining me in studio is the Oklahoman's Justin Wingerter. And Justin, Mick Cornett, Kevin Stitt, the two Republican nominees for governor that advanced past the primary, they've been engaging in a handful of forums and traveling across the state. I want to ask you about one forum in particular. Last night, KOCO News, ABC affiliate, held a forum between the two candidates. And several minutes was devoted towards each candidate's kind of attack ads against the other. And it got a little feisty at times. Stitt has criticized Cornett of not being a true Trump backer. Cornett has accused Stitt of, not properly running his mortgage company. Did we learn anything yesterday, or did we just see kind of the anger and the stress of a campaign in its final days kind of play out when both candidates are face to face?
It was a good line of questioning, first of all, from
yeah,
KOCO.
I was impressed.
They held them to answer the questions about the attack ads. And this has been an issue. We've gotten kind of past the point where the campaign has gone on so long, you kind of get past the issues and the stump speeches just become repetitive, and you kind of mix it up a little bit. Attack ads in the last week or two are to be expected. And then if you're differentiating yourself from the other guy, you're showing maybe some things he did that voters may not like, I think that's all fair play. So, but they did have to answer for their attack ads the other last night, I believe it was, and whether or not that was whether or not they crossed the line, whether or not children should look up to them, or if that's how they should handle disputes. It was a tough line of questioning, and I think we learned, first of all, the candidates had to think on their feet. They had to answer quickly. They had to defend their own actions, and kind of that unsavory action that you don't necessarily want to talk about a lot, the negative attack ads. And I'm curious what you thought. It was an interesting back and forth, and it made sense, of course, that a dispute or a debate about attack ads would get kind of negative in itself. But
well, I enjoyed it because it had them both talking or addressing each other somewhat about the issues they're raising, on the airways. I always get a little prickly about the whole idea of negative ads. I understand what the definition of that is, but kind of in the same way as a reporter when people talk about a positive news story or a negative news story.
Right.
It's all really in the eye of the beholder, and we don't walk around the newsroom with a checklist of saying how many positive or negative stories do we have. I think it's kind of the same way in politics, although I do know, negative ads are the ones that are, being critical of your opponent. But isn't that what we've heard these, as you said, we've heard both candidates kind of stumping for themselves. We know who they are.
Yeah.
I think it's fair game for them to talk about the other one. So let's talk about some of those attacks that we've heard in some of the airways and last night. So against Stitt, Stitt has been running as this business owner, this outsider who wants to come in, run government as a business. One of the knocks against him that Cornett is making is that his mortgage company had got dinged by the federal government during the mortgage crisis. I think those are fair questions to raise, don't you think?
Oh yeah, and it's, first of all, it's Cornett trying to take Stitt's best line of, personality building and turn it around on him. It's taking that businessman approach and saying, well, you ran a business that a lot of people don't like. And mortgage lending, not the most popular area of industry, and so it's just turning it around and it's trying to use it against them, and it's specifically in connection with the the financial crisis, which hit so many people obviously across the country and in Oklahoma. And so any attempt to tie your opponent to that would be a pretty good line of attack there if you're in politics. And so I think it's totally fair game to bring up his business. How honest those attacks were depends on who you ask, but I think it was a pretty reasonable line of attack. And it's interesting. It's telling, I think, in a way that one line of attack you could use against Stitt is that he has no government experience, and you're going to take over a state, or run the executive branch at least of a state, having never done anything remotely like that, frankly. No experience in government, and yet that's not the line of attack, because we've seen the outsiders win The president is someone who had no government experience. First president ever did not have any government or military experience before taking office, and so that's not the line of attack. It's actually something else. Go after the business that he ran.
Yeah, well, and I always think it's interesting when politicians say, we need to run government like a business. But here I would put this out there that, a Stitt runs, a mortgage company. If he were to be hired to, let's say, run a chain of fast food restaurants, some may say, well, yes, maybe you were successful at running a mortgage company, but what do you know about running a chain of fast food restaurants, and vice versa? Yet everyone that's run a business feels like it's applicable to running government. So I think that's kind of interesting. But I mean, you're right. He is running on this kind of outsider perspective. I imagine trying to run on the idea that I'm a business owner. I know what it takes to grow businesses. We want to do that here in Oklahoma. This is probably a hard attack for him to really say what he wants to say, because I imagine that when you have a large institution like that, and I kind of, when you read between the lines in some of his statements, it seems like, hey, this was a tough time for mortgages. A lot of people were playing fast and loose. He's saying that wasn't us, but you're dealing in so many interactions that you're going to have things that don't go well, that you're going to have bad mortgages, and that's just, you try to correct them when you see them, or you try to address the problem. I would imagine that behind closed doors, a lot of people who run these mortgage companies would say, it's kind of the cost of doing business. You just try to do as best you can. You can't really say that to the right. voters. You can't just say, well, every now and then you're going to have a bad mortgage. Just like, if you run a fast food chain, you're going to say, well, hey, every now and then you're going to get the wrong order. You can't say that to the customer. But yes, he's running on that outsider perspective. For Cornett, he's running on the leading the revitalization of Oklahoma City, which Stitt has attacked him on. But he's also running as this kind of moderate. And now he hasn't used that word, but that's kind of been the banner he's waved most of his political career. And Stitt's saying, hey, a moderate doesn't cut it in Oklahoma. You got to have the Trump tattoo on your forearm for us to back you. Are these criticisms fair, that he's not a big supporter of the Trump presidency?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and you heard Cornett say during that clip, if you get a chance to watch it online, the clip there where they're discussing the ads, Cornett says the word conservative in reference to himself about 20 times, and he keeps bringing that up. He keeps hammering that home, and because, of course, it's a Republican runoff. And so he is trying to make that case. And yeah, he has a more moderate approach to government, and that's been something that's helped him probably in Oklahoma City, but is, obviously in a Republican runoff could hurt him. So you did see that quite a bit at the debate last night, and several debates really the last couple months. I mean, Stitt's been trying to make the case that he's not conservative enough, he's not enough of a Trump supporter, and look, Cornett was pretty slow to come around to Trump to the extent that he's ever really come around to him. He's been critical of the president before he was the president, right down the stretch there. And so, yeah, it's absolutely a fair criticism.
Yeah, I think some of the ads, maybe where it gets a little bit, overboard, is that, trying to paint him as a defender of sanctuary cities. Yeah. Or some of these other kind of liberal tropes that, I mean, there's no question. I mean, Cornett is not a liberal. I mean, he's not, I mean, I don't know, you can debate on whether or not he was a never Trumper, I don't know. I mean, he never used those words, but he was, he's not a liberal.
Right.
And I also don't think you can debate the fact, like you just said, that he was, quote, slow to come around on Trump. I mean, he had some pretty, for the time, critical things to say as a Republican. I mean,
absolutely.
These were some, some, when you say I'm not sure yet, when it's at the nominating convention, you're saying, I'm not sure if I can support this man.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big statement. There was one forum that Cornett was on, or he at least was speaking to voters, and our Chris Castile got this video of him answering a question about Trump, and Cornett said that that he and his wife on election night, they left the election party when Trump became the winner because they wanted to come and process this interesting thing that had happened. And I feel like that may be selling their feelings short a little bit.
Yeah.
But since then, he has come around and said that he supports the president. Is it enough just to say that you support the president? I mean, how much do you think voters really care? I mean, I think they care about Trump. Republicans care about the president. In a state like Oklahoma, he has pretty good favorability so far with Republicans. Is this going to be an issue in the runoff, do you think?
Yeah, I would think among a certain segment of the population, and that is going to be the segment more inclined to vote in a Republican runoff. And there are people, I mean, there are plenty of Republicans, and going to congressional town halls is probably where I see it more than anything else. There are a segment of Republican voters who believe that Republican elected officials are not supportive enough of the president, and they see, Jeff Flake and they see Bob Corker and others in Congress criticize the president pretty openly. Republicans, even pretty conservative Republicans, criticizing the president, and that reinforces their desire to see their own elected officials be very openly pro-Trump. It's not, of course, every Republican voter. It may not even be a majority, but there are quite a few out there who want to see open displays of pro-Trump, feelings. And so, yeah, I think those sort of people are going to want that from the governor. And obviously, one of the two candidates, Stitt, has been much more open in his support of Donald Trump. And so that, yeah, I do think that's going to play with a segment of the population. I don't know what the number is on how many people that is, but that segment is out there, certainly.
Well, Trump right now is a litmus test on almost every election that's taking place across the country, so it's hard to imagine that wouldn't be the case somewhat here in Oklahoma. Yeah. Maybe you're running for governor, you're not running for federal office, so maybe you don't have to answer to some of those questions as much. But I have to think it's going to be a factor. Now, the old Reagan saying, "Do no harm to fellow Republicans," or say nothing bad about Republicans, is now say nothing bad about Trump. However, to transition here a little bit, maybe we're hearing from some Republican leaders that it is okay to say things that are bad about Trump. Specifically, Congressman Cole quoted in the New York Times yesterday after kind of a bombshell of a day, or at least that was 2 days ago, I guess. Seems like forever now. The news of Paul Manafort and Trump's former attorney, Cohen, Cole saying that, hey, if you're a Republican running for office in a district where you feel like you have to say something bad about Trump, then maybe you should go ahead and say something bad about Trump right now.
Pretty much.
I was surprised to see that.
It's a little surprising. You have to understand it as it's political strategy from a longtime political strategist in Tom Cole. He's not saying that necessarily he opposes Trump. He's saying that if you are in a district that either maybe went for Hillary Clinton, but you're still a Republican congressman representing that district, or it's a district that's swinging to the left, that you're in some serious trouble, you're a moderate Republican, or just in a moderate district and you're a little worried, go ahead and speak out and criticize the president. Interesting enough, we've seen this on the other side from Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has told Democrats, if you need to criticize me, you need to bash me, go for it. I can take it. I've been there. If that's what you need to do to get either reelected or elected for the first time in a Republican seat, go for it. I mean, she's kind of given Democrats that option. I'm not going to hold it against you. Cole's kind of saying that to Republicans here, although he doesn't have the authority. He's not speaking for Trump here, but he is saying that if you're a Republican and you need to criticize the president, do so, or at least don't jump out there and immediately defend him, because we don't know what's going to come.
Yeah.
I'll just read the quote if that's okay, because I don't want to misquote the congressman here. Quote, anybody who says this is not disturbing is not being honest. He's referring to investigations into the president and those close to the president. So my advice to any candidate would be keep your powder dry, don't rush to attack or defend anybody, because you don't know enough to have a reaction that you can still defend 3 months from now. And I might say 3 weeks from now. I mean, things change so quickly right now in Washington. In other words, don't say definitively that the president or someone around the president hasn't done this wrong or that wrong. These investigations are still ongoing. Be very careful and be able to be general enough that you can, still defend yourself three months from now, as he puts it, and 3 months from now, of course, being November when we have elections. So, I think he's just kind of giving Republicans some more options. I don't know if the president agrees with them here, because the president does not take criticism all that well, especially from fellow Republicans, the way maybe Pelosi does from Democrats. So I don't know if the president would agree here, but Cole at least is saying if you have to be critical, or at least not immediately defend everything the president does, that's okay. We need you to come back to Washington after November or after January, get elected, get reelected, do what you need to do to make that happen.
Well, I'm no psychic and I don't know the president. He doesn't strike me as someone who's necessarily on board with the idea of, hey, say whatever you need to say about me, I can take it. But what's interesting about Cole's statement there, I mean, there's a difference between saying this is disturbing and then asking that rhetorical question, is it disturbing? Well, it's hard to say it's not. I mean, so there is a little bit of a difference. He's kind of, putting his foot in the water. And I know you're saying he doesn't speak for the party, and it's not like he's, sending up some bat signal for Republicans. But in a state like Oklahoma, I mean, that is an interesting thing for a congressman to say. And I don't think Cole's worried about his, favorability amongst voters. He's pretty much locked that down in a lot of ways. But I think it's telling from one of the most conservative states, which is one reason why the New York Times probably led with that quote, that you have, one of the congressmen saying, this is kind of disturbing, and it's hard to really say where this is going to go.
Yeah, and Cole has said similar things before. In fact, he said them about his own district. He's been asked about Trump before, and he said that my district is, whatever percent for Trump. He always cites an overwhelming number. And he makes the point that, my district wants me to come out here. The people who sent me here want me to be supportive of the president in almost all cases, and therefore that's what I am. I'm representing my district when I do that. He's making a similar argument here in that represent your district. Even if you're just running to represent your district, do so now. If it's a district that's either a Democratic district or kind of in the middle, and it's a little skeptical of Trump, you can be skeptical of Trump. It's okay.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you have to rush out and defend the president or attack the president's critics. Go ahead and if you need to kind of be quiet about it for a while, that's okay. If you're running in a district where that makes sense. So he would say his district is pretty overwhelmingly Trump. He'd be right about that. And he would say that he is going to be supportive of the president for that reason.
Yeah.
Again, you have to think of it, I mean, the way Cole is thinking of it is political strategy here. He's not strictly thinking about policy or whether or not he agrees or people should agree with the president on all these issues. He's thinking as a political strategist does in terms of getting elected in November, because he's been there. He's run the NRCC. I mean, he's run things that groups that try to get Republicans elected specifically in the House, and so that's what he's just advising candidates at this point.
Yeah, maybe the only candidate or the only congressman in Oklahoma that probably has to really consider that might be Steve Russell, the 5th district.
Right.
This is a however you call it. It is a conservative. It's a red district. It's somewhat Definitely. Solid, although we've talked many times in this episode of how solid will it be come November. Maybe he probably would say he's not thinking about this, and probably Congressman Russell really isn't. I mean, given what I kind of know about the guy, but if you're a political strategist for him, I mean, what are you thinking when you're starting to think about the fact that we don't know where these Trump investigations are going? They seem to have entered a new level. Come November, we're probably going to be going up against a somewhat formidable, Democratic challenger who's going to have money, who may appeal to suburban women, which is an important demographic. I mean, what are you thinking if you're, in the Russell camp right now?
As we were just talking about being as, for lack of a better word, as Trumpy as your district, as Trump supporting as your district is, I think Russell probably fits that mold pretty well. He has been supportive of Trump, and the district did go for Trump by a narrow margin, but he's also been kind of wishy-washy. I mean, he's been kind of critical of the president at times. Obviously, he doesn't like the demeanor and the, that sort of bombastic approach that the president has. So he has been critical there. He has commented recently on the Mueller investigation, which Cole would kind of recommend not doing, if I understand his quote correctly here. He has been he's been suggestive that Mueller and team should kind of wrap things up. That it's been going on a while. They should wrap things up. So that is interesting. That's about the extent of his comments on the investigation. So, of course, until you have results from the investigation, I mean, a final result, a final conclusion, I don't know that it matters too much what he has said up until then. I mean, Bob Mueller's not listening to the congressman here, so I don't know to what extent that really factors in. But I would say Russell's pretty on par with his district when it comes to Trump. Kendra Horne and Camp would disagree with me on that. They would say he's too conservative, and we've talked before that he's quite conservative for a district that's trending Democratic. And Horne, of course, would try to use that against him, and will try to use it against him if she wins on Tuesday.
Well, isn't this? I mean, but this news is good for Horne, I would think, because not well, she's running as a Democrat, so of course it's good. Democrats are going to say this is good news for us.
Absolutely.
But I think Democrats have kind of been in a tough spot, especially in districts like Oklahoma City and maybe some more moderate districts where they're trying to be competitive, where you have to walk a fine line when you're going to bash Trump, because you still have a lot of people say, listen, I know he's not everyone's favorite guy, but I'm a Republican, I support him. I haven't seen anything that makes me think it's a deal breaker yet. I think the risk for Democrats was, as of last week, the risk was that we go into November and nothing really new comes out. That the same, the battle lines are the same as they were. There's no new things from the investigation. Democrats are probably going to want some more, meat on the bones to be able to clearly say, listen, I'm saying that if I was elected, I may vote for impeachment, because now we have actual things on the table that warrant that conversation.
Yeah.
I would just imagine Horne going into November. I would be interested to see how aggressive she would be in calling out the president. How aggressive has she been so far up to this point?
She's been much more critical of the congressman, of Russell, which obviously she's running against him. That makes sense. She's not brought up Trump a whole lot. She kind of brought up the people around him. I mean, Betsy DeVos comes up a lot for education, obviously, and things like that. So there are examples like that. She's not one to bring up the investigation, at least in the public events I go to. She's not one to bring up even Trump's name all that often. She still is very much on policy. Healthcare and education dominate a lot of what she talks about. That will change a little bit. I think she will get bringing up the president more and more, but she's doing it very gingerly, no doubt about that. She is not someone who wants to bring up the I word. She would not want that word to come up. She would prefer it probably not come up between now and the election.
Well, then maybe she's not appreciative of this news. Maybe she doesn't want to see this go forward. Because,
it's always good news, I think.
Well, it is, but I mean, if some other bombshell comes out next, once again, I think I'll agree we've entered a new level on this investigation, and if it continues to progress in that way, to where you are kind of forced to talk about impeachment. I'm not saying that I'm not putting impeachment on the table. I'm saying last week I think a lot of Democrats were able to say, it's way too early to talk about impeachment. Let's see where this investigation goes.
Yeah.
I think you can still say that, but now you have a little bit, like I said, more meat on the bones to say, well, was there any criminal misconduct committed by the president? So if you are a Democrat trying to be competitive in a moderate or conservative district, you're right, you don't want to talk about impeachment. I wonder if she could be forced to do so.
Yeah, we'll see. I think you talk around the issue. You bring up corruption within the administration, or you talk about it in kind of general terms, problems within the Republican Party, this and that. But I don't think you want to bring up the I word. You run the risk of a backlash where Republicans come out en masse and say, we cannot allow, even if I disagree with Trump, he doesn't deserve to be impeached. We have to keep Russell in there as a safeguard against impeachment. And you've seen some Republicans, even in special elections, argue that do not elect the Democrat, or you do run the risk of impeachment. We have to keep the president in there. And so that could come up if the Democratic nominee in the 5th District brought up impeachment, then you would have a backlash. And Russell would love to seize on that, I think. Absolutely.
So maybe this news is good for Russell, because he has been critical of the president, and maybe in some ways that has caused Trump supporters in his district to cringe a little bit. But he can probably go into November, unless something changes, saying, listen, I'm not voting for impeachment. She is. And that's the big difference right here. Well, I keep saying she is. That is, if she makes it past the runoff, she's expected to do so. As we wrap up, let's talk about the runoff a little bit. The 5th District Democrats have a runoff on Tuesday.
Right.
We're expecting Horne to probably emerge from that, right?
Well, she certainly, got far more votes in the primary, the June primary. She would seem to be the front runner by all accounts. Certainly, going up against Tom Guild, guy who knows this district very well.
He's been around for a while, yeah.
And did come in second in the June primary, and we'll see. I was out with both candidates this week. I would say Guild's focused more on the runoff. Well, I don't want to be unfair. They're both focused on the runoff. Guild's focused on Horne. He's critical of Horne. Horne is critical of Russell. She is looking at the general election. And she's clearly the front runner at this point. So
running like the nominee.
Makes sense. Yeah, running like the nominee. It avoids her, getting down, and as we started the show with attack ads. It avoids you getting into that kind of attacking a fellow Democrat, that you're going to need all the Democratic votes you can get in November, plus some. And so she will, she's very focused on Russell right now, critical of him on a number of issues, education being probably one of her top issues, that in healthcare. And really, and Gil and her both are on those two issues. They don't disagree all that much on policy. There are some areas, and healthcare is one of them. But they're talking about many of the same issues on the campaign trail in their own different ways. But yeah, I mean, healthcare and education really dominant issues for both of those two, as I saw them on the campaign trail just this week.
Yeah, well, we'll be watching for that and many other races on Tuesday night. Hey, the Oklahoman's got you covered on the run-up to the election, not only in every edition of the Oklahoman moving forward here. We'll have an election night show with live results next Tuesday, and then, of course, next week here on Political State, we'll break down everything that we saw. Hey, we referenced a couple of things in today's show, the KOCO debate. We'll put a link to that at News OK, where you can find this episode, as well as the New York Times article that quoted Representative Cole. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Join us next week. Once again, it'll be after the runoff, and we'll break down what we saw. With Justin, I'm Ben with the Oklahoman. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for another episode of Political State.